All right, so we're going to find zeros. Another way to think about this is that you are finding the solution or solving these quadratic functions. So remember, we want either one of these two factors to be 0, so we're going to set them both equal to 0. So we have k plus 1 equals 0 and k minus 5 equals 0. And we're going to solve for k. So minus 1, and we're going to end up with k equals negative 1. That's one of our solutions. We're going to add 5, and that's going to mean that k is equal to 5. So these are our two solutions here, and that's it. All right, next one, same kind of deal. We're going to set it both equal to 0 and solve for both. And we get a equals negative 1. And a equals negative 2. So those are our two solutions here, or our two zeros. All right. 4k plus 5 equals 0, and k plus 1 equals 0. So we do want to follow order of operations, so we're going to get rid of the addition and subtraction piece first. We're going to say 4k is equal to negative 5. And we're going to divide by 4, and we're going to leave it just like that. So we're going to say k is equal to negative 5/4. That's going to be one of our answers. And the other answer is pretty simple. We're going to end up with k is equal to negative 1. Okay. 2m plus 3 equals 0. And we have 4m plus 3 equals 0, and we'll solve both of these. So subtract first. We get 2m equals negative 3, and then divide by 2. So we have m is equal to negative 3/2. That's one of our answers. Subtract 3 on both sides. We end up with 4m equals negative 3. Divide by 4, and we end up with m is equal to negative 3/4. So that would be our other answer here. All right, so for 5 through 10, your directions do say that you have to have it equal to 0. So in order for us to do that, we need to add 5. That's going to make this side 0. And where would we add 5 over here? Well, we would add it to our constant. So we actually end up with x squared minus 11x plus 24. And we're going to factor from here. Okay, so we're going to do the box method and everything. I'll come up here and do that. With x squared and 24. And we do have a negative middle term, which tells us both of these have to be negative. So x and x. And we're trying to get a sum of negative 11. And so the ones that we're going to use are going to be 8, negative 8, and negative 3. Those are the two factors that will add to give us negative 11, but multiply to give us 24. So we actually end up with x minus 8 times x minus 3 equals 0. So we just took it from here, and we factored it, and we made it look like that. And now we're going to set each part equal to 0. X minus 8 equals 0, and x minus 3 equals 0. So we're going to add 8 and add 8. Tells us that x has to be equal to 8. Or if we add 3 and add 3, we can also say that x is equal to 3. So basically you're just moving this term over, connecting it to your other constant, factoring out, and then doing the same process as above. All right, so we're going to subtract 5 over here to get this side to go to 0. And we want to make sure we put it with our constant over here, so that 15. So we're going to rewrite. We have n squared plus 7n, and 15 minus 5 is going to give us a positive 10. That should all equal 0. And now we can factor from here. So we're going to do our square. We're going to say n squared and positive 10. Now we're all only looking at positives here, so we're looking for two factors that are going to multiply together to give us 10, but add together to give us 7. So our two factors we should choose are 2 times 5. It's going to multiply to get 10 and add to get 7. So 2n and 5n, that is going to double check and make sure we get that 7 in there. So this means it factors out to n plus 2 times n plus 5. And we can't forget, it equals 0. Okay, and at this point, we'll separate it and do n plus 2 equals 0 and n plus 5 equals 0. Minus 2, n equals negative 2, and minus 5 tells us that n also equals negative 5. Okay. This time we're going to add 2 to both sides just to cancel that out and make sure it equals a 0 here. And we're going to add 2 over here, which means we're going to end up with 24. The rest stays the same, so we have n squared minus 10n plus 24. Time to factor. N squared, 24. And we do know that both of these are going to have to be negative. A negative times a negative to give us this positive because they have to add together to give us a negative number here. Okay, so our two factors that we want to use are 6 and 4. Negative 6 times negative 4 is going to give us 24, and negative 6 plus negative 4 is going to give us negative 10. So negative 6 and negative 4. So we have n minus 6 times n minus 4 equals 0. And we'll set them both equal to 0 and solve. So plus 6 tells us n equals positive 6. Plus 4 tells us n equals 4. So those are our two answers. All right, here we're going to subtract 6, get that to go to 0, and we want to subtract 6 from negative 12. That's actually going to give us negative 18, okay? Bring down the rest, so we have 3n and that positive n squared. We want to come over here and factor it. So n squared, and we have a negative 18. That tells us one of our factors here is going to have to be positive and one is going to have to be negative. So I'm thinking to myself, 1 and 18, that's not ever going to give me 3, whether I add or subtract them. 2 and 9, still not going to give me 3. 3 and 6, though. 3 and 6 is what we want to use. So 3 and 6, we need to determine which one of these is negative. Well, since we have a positive 3 in here, we want to stick with positive 6 and minus 3, or negative 3. Positive 6 minus 3 gives us that sum of positive 3n. All right, so we're going to take this and factor it. We have n minus 3, n plus 6, and it is still equal to 0 here, so we can solve it. N minus 3 equals 0, n plus 6 equals 0. We're going to solve from here by adding 3 to both sides. N equals positive 3. Subtracting 6 on both sides. N equals negative 6 over here. So these are our two answers here. All right, these last two are a little bit more complicated. You kind of have to put together everything we've done for this week. First step, we are going to make sure it equals 0, so we're going to subtract 6 from both sides. When we rewrite, it's going to say 6n squared minus 18n minus 24 equals 0. Now, if you paid attention to the last video, we talked about when you have these bigger numbers here, you want to try to pull out a GCF. So the first thing I'm going to do is divide all of this by 6. It has a common factor of 6 here. So I'm going to end up with n squared, 6 divided by 6 leaves me with 1. I don't need to write that. Negative 18 divided by 6 is going to leave me with negative 3. Keep your n. Negative 24 divided by 6 leaves me with negative 4. Equals 0. Now technically at this point we could put this in parentheses and put our 6 out front, because if we distributed the 6 back in, we would end up with this 6n squared minus 18n minus 24. But we're going to kind of ignore that 6 for right now, and we're just going to factor this part. So I'm going to come over here and do my factorization. I've got n squared and negative 4. So negative 4 tells us we're going to have one positive and one negative number. And we have either 2 times 2, which those would cancel out if we had one positive and one negative, or we have 1 times 3. okay? Or excuse me, 1 times 4, which is going to give us that sum of 3 if we have -4 and +1, because we're looking for -3 here. So -4 plus 1 will give us that -3. All right, if we add those two together. So we have our two factors. So again, we're going to keep this 6 out front and then write our two factors just like this. So we have n minus 4 and we have n plus 1, and that equals 0. Now technically we have 3 factors here. So we should set 6 equal to 0. Is that ever going to happen? It's not. So we can kind of ignore that part. It's not going to be possible for 6 to be one of our answers. N minus 4 equals 0. That's possible. We can solve that. And n plus 1 equals 0. That's also possible. We can solve that. So these are going to be the only 2 parts that give us an answer. So we're going to add 4 and end up with n equals 4. We're going to subtract 1 and end up with n equals -1. So our 2 answers here are still going to just be n equals 4 and n equals -1. All right. Now this one's a little funky too because we don't have a constant here at the end. But if I rewrote this to say 7r squared minus 14r plus 0, that would still make sense over here. Because when you add 0, you're not really changing anything. That equals -7. And then from here, we can take this -7 and move it over and combine it with that 0. So we're going to add 7. And we're going to rewrite. So we have 7r squared minus 14r. And then this is going to be plus 7 equals, and then -7 plus 7 gives us that 0. All right. We're ready to take out a factor here. So between 7, 14, and 7, we can take out the factor of 7. So we're dividing everything by 7. And again, we're just going to put that 7 out front and then put whatever's left in these parentheses. So if we take this and divide by 7, 7 divided by 7 just gives us 1r squared, or r squared. -14 divided by 7 gives us -2r. And 7 divided by 7 leaves us with just 1. Again, it's still equal to 0 over here. Okay, this is the only part we're factoring. And the only way we can ever get 1 is to multiply using 1s. Now we do have to pay attention here because this is a negative. So that does tell us that we need to do -1 times -1. And that's going to give us that -2r when we combine these together. Okay, so keep your 7 out front. Then we're going to have r minus 1 times r minus 1. And remember, you could write this as r minus 1 squared equals 0. These two are going to give us the same answer. So in this case, we really only are going to end up with one answer because 7 equals 0, never going to happen. R minus 1 equals 0, that's going to be the same as if we did this r minus 1 equals 0. So there's no need to do it twice. So we're going to add 1 and add 1. Tells us our only answer here is going to be r equals 1. It's the only thing that's going to make this whole statement true if we plugged it back in.